I think I'd go to fire safety equality. I think the inequality that we see with respect to fire safety afforded to different groups should worry a lot of people. There was a very large tragic fire in central London in quite a wealthy local authority. Really unfortunately, as part of this tragic incident, 72 individuals lost their life. It shocked the nation really, both in terms of the level of loss of life and also the ferocity of the fire. A fundamental tenet of a fire safety strategy is if people need to get out, how are they going to get out? That, of course, you can't think about means of egress without thinking about an inclusive form of means of egress. So I grew up in North Devon, effectively the countryside, and I spent quite a lot of my childhood out and about in fields, in forests, setting fire to stuff.
Oh, right. Wow.
Not from a pyromaniac point of view, but learning about the physics of fire from an experiential perspective. There is a property in the City of London, 41 Cloth Fair, which is the only, to the best of my knowledge, it's the only building which survived the Great Fire of London in 1666.
Oh, wow.
I'd love to work on that building.
Every leader has a story to tell, and the Safe Leader podcast uncovers the diversity story behind leading figures championing change to make our world a better place. Join me, your host, Mark McBride-Wright, as we hear from business leaders, academics, entrepreneurs, and agents of change as they share their journeys of innovation, resilience, and transformation. Together, we explore how they embrace the principles of safe leadership, sharing, acting, feeling, and empowering to create safer, more inclusive environments for everyone. Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Safe Leader podcast. I am your host, Mark McBride-Wright, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Benjamin Ralph, who is a director at Hollis. So Benjamin Ralph is a chartered engineer, dual registered with the Institution of Fire Engineers and the Institution of Mechanical Engineers, and serves as a director at Hollis, where he leads the Building Safety and Fire Service. He is dedicated to creating integrated, conscientious solutions across the property life cycle, encompassing design, construction, operation, and beyond through interdisciplinary problem solving and engineering analysis. Benjamin's work aligns with critical industry frameworks, including the Hackett Review, the Building Safety Act, and the Grenfell Inquiry, ensuring practical, adaptable, and future-ready solutions. He is a passionate advocate for equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, and he's particularly focused on disability, neurodiversity, and inclusive design. His research interests include computational natural language processing, complexity science, and systems thinking in the built environment, alongside his expertise in fire experimentation and CFD-based fire modelling. At Hollis, Benjamin champions clear, practical advice, helping clients navigate building safety with a commitment to exceeding compliance and delivering enduring value. Ben, hello.
Hey Mark, thanks very much for the intro and thanks for having me on the podcast today. Really looking forward to our chat.
Remind me best way to address you. Full name Benjamin or Ben?
Ben's good.
Yeah, Ben's good. Fantastic. So, yeah, it's been a few years since we last saw one another, I think.
In real life, yeah.
Yeah. I saw you at the Institution of Engineering Technology Awards once, the Young Women Engineer Awards. You were at Foster and Partners back then, weren't you?
Yes, correct, yeah.
So I guess we've crossed paths at various things that are where we've ran events in the past, but it's nice to actually get this contact time with you. And so on the podcast, I always like to, with the guests, go back to your younger self, and sort of unpick what were your motivations, what led you to the career that you're having now, what inspired you, So that was a really impressive biography. First time I've read it, so lot of words in there I was trying to get my mouth around. And so you've got a really impressive portfolio there, where you've got a great example of where you've really gone deep on a particular niche and then specialized, but still retained some flexibility and adaptability around. You're not too niche, but you're also not too broad. But fire engineering isn't necessarily the first thing that young people might think of as something that they want to do. So, what brought you to a career in this space? What inspired you?
Yeah, sure thing. There's probably two answers to the question, one that's a little bit more romantic and one that's probably closer to the truth, to be honest. The slightly romantic one is that I grew up in North Devon, effectively the countryside, and I spent quite a lot of my childhood out and about in fields, in forests, setting fire to stuff.
Oh, right, wow.
Not from a pyromaniac point of view, but learning about the physics of fire from an experiential perspective, setting alight to things, setting alight to some of my toys. And there's a version of reality where I say I could trace back my professional life in fire safety, fire science, fire engineering to those days. The slightly less romantic version of the story is that I was looking for a graduate engineering job, and my search criteria in the search engine was graduate asterisk engineer. And I was scrolling through and I saw graduate fire engineer, and I thought, that sounds pretty cool. I like the sound of that. And here we are now. So I think the true story is somewhere in the middle of those two.
Wow. And I guess the fact that there's two, so you're a fellow of the IFE and also of the IMECE, so you've reached the top level that you can reach, in those two respective institutions. So how have you found? Well, actually, before we come to that, let's go back to that graduate fire engineer job then that you saw. What were the steps that you took to then specialize? Or I guess you sort of specializing from the beginning, actually, aren't you? Because you moved into. It's not very often that you see fire engineer. Don't think there are many courses that.
Yeah.
So what did you do? Mechanical engineering and then move into fire engineering.
Yeah, my undergrad was actually civil engineering.
Oh, right.
And I worked for 1 year as a civil engineer, and that was what you think of as bread and butter civil engineering: roads, build-ups, car parking, drainage, flood, things like that. And then I got this job, graduate fire engineer, and you're absolutely right that there isn't a great deal of in the same way as if you compare it to something like civil engineering or mechanical engineering or aeronautical engineering, there isn't a massive choice of undergraduate educations for fire engineering. So what you'll find often, and it's the case for me, is that a lot of folk who now are practicing fire engineers, they might be chartered engineers registered with Institution of Fire Engineers, for example. They actually come from quite a wide range of discipline backgrounds. They might be mechanical engineers, they might have an undergraduate in chemical engineering, any of the engineering disciplines really, or even further than that, into physics or mathematics. And then there's another route into becoming a fire professional, a fire safety professional. Some people come into it from a fire and rescue background, so they're a fire safety. They specialise within the fire and rescue service with respect to fire safety, and then they specialise further into the consultancy side of things. That's another typical route into the fire safety profession.
So what you mentioned in the overview there were you mentioned there was mention to some very, very new legislation that's come into enforcement in the United Kingdom through the the Grenfell tragedy leading to the Building Safety Act and all that being created from Judith Hackett's review of the sector. How are you seeing uptake on, actually it'd be useful if you could just give an overview of the whole chain of influence there, what happened at Grenfell from a fire perspective, what the review found, and what the Act is now requiring organisations to do. Because I don't think many of the listeners will, and we've got quite an international audience as well, so they might not be familiar with it.
Yeah. Okay. So there was a very large tragic fire in central London, in a quite a wealthy local authority, and really unfortunately, as part of this tragic incident, 72 individuals lost their life, and it shocked the nation really, both in terms of the level of loss of life and also the ferocity of the fire. The imagery that was captured at that fire event is quite shocking, and that initialized lots of different things in lots of parts of the built environment, of the sector, of the disciplines and industries that all work together as part of the built environment. And one thing that was initialized was an independent review carried out by Dame Judith Hackett, which people call the Hackett Review. And that was a piece of work that was done relatively soon after the fire and was carried out, given the scale of the report, quite quickly. And it spent a lot of its content looking at the regulatory system.
Yeah.
And you can trace most of what then has now become the Building Safety Act, a lot of the requirements, the prescriptive requirements, the regulatory requirements, the framework requirements, back to that the Hackett Review. Of course, there's other things that have been going on. There was a public inquiry into the fire at Grenfell, which was spread over 2 phases. That was a much, much longer process. The second report has now been issued with a set of recommendations, but also a lot of very deep, nuanced analysis that has quite deep ramifications for any professional really working within the built environment at any stage with respect to building safety and fire. And then other bits and pieces, industry-driven things, looking at competency, looking at good practice, looking at the whole supply chain, really, all the way down to passive fire protection, to competency frameworks and standard approaches, things like that.
Yeah. I never ever really worked in built environment safety. The closest I got to sort of fire work was doing fire and gas mapping and modelling for offshore assets, and then looking at different layers of protection, or looking at preventative protection over reactive protection, or passive PFP and AFP, active fire protection, and passive fire protection, and aqueous film forming foam, I think, AFF or something. The stuff that used to put in the thing. It's really funny now living in New York, just the difference with regard to attitude to fire safety. Only last week in our building, the PA was being tested. And I mean, I knew it was there, but I had never heard it. So to then just hear this voice coming into the apartment here, it just made you feel. I feel safer in this building than I do when I've been in high rises back at home. There's sprinklers in every room. The fire escapes are clearly separate in a isolated, block on the side of the building. The doors are really, really, really heavy to the point that they're almost my daughter actually chipped her toenail on the
Ouch.
door a few weeks ago, which we've been tending to, the poorly patient.
Hmm.
But just a lot more. It feels like a lot more goes into the design over here. Like it's my experience anyway now, being a resident in New York, and so with new builds in the United Kingdom is the same level of rigor and requirement going into having to have, sprinklers throughout houses and throughout apartments and in hallways and what have
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, sure thing. Yep. Um, so one thing to say right up front is that with respect to statistics, fire statistics, incidents, injuries and fatalities, the UK is a very well-performing
Okay.
country internationally, and it's something that, as an industry, we've all previously been quite proud of, really, and the number coming down. Of course, the fire at Grenfell uh, didn't align with that historic reduction in fire fatalities and fire injuries. Um, as you might imagine, different countries all around the world, they take a different approach to fire safety design of buildings.
Yeah.
It of course, it's quite difficult to say one approach is better or worse, um, because more often than not, it's a culmination of lots of different elements that sit together as part of an overall system, and that system is a building. But then there's also a wider system around that building,
Yeah.
professionals and competencies and third party, or the regulatory system or
Yeah.
third party diligence and things like this. Um, to just specifically pick at the two countries that you mentioned there, the UK and the US, and definitely what you've described there aligns with what I would expect in that. Very generally, the UK has always taken an approach of passive fire protection.
Hmm.
So things like compartmentation, approaches like compartmentation, protected means of egress, protected corridors, fire doors, fire floors, which effectively minimize the amount of area that a fire, when started, can grow to and spread
Yeah.
throughout a building. Whereas the US, more often than not, leans on active measures.
Mm.
So things like sprinklers is a good
Okay.
example, and less so on the approaches that we do in the UK, like compartmentation.
You think you'd want both, you know? Like when we used to
Yeah,
design oil rigs, you had both. You had AFP and PFP.
yeah, and of course there's a combination of both, but maybe that needle moves a bit
Yeah.
from country to country.
Yeah. True. Um, so you mentioned in your intro there about how you're a big advocate, big believer in the values of equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So how has that influenced your approach to engineering and safety in the built environment?
Yeah, so there's some let's zero in on just on fire safety then, and probably two interesting things to talk about. One being means of egress from a building. So of course,
Yeah.
a core part of a fire safety strategy for a building is how are people going to get out of that building when there is a fire. And there's some intricacies around phased evacuation or zoned evacuation or different approaches of evacuation. Notwithstanding, a fundamental tenet of a fire safety strategy is if people need to get out, how are they going to get out?
Yeah.
And that, of course, you can't think about means of egress without thinking about means of egress, an inclusive form of means of egress. So egress systems that might work for some folk might well not work for other folk. The most obvious being sets of stairs,
Yeah.
for example. And there is a tendency that I'd encourage everybody to try and avoid, in thinking that the only group of individuals that are excluded by a means of egress system that relies on stairs are people in wheelchairs.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Of course, it's much more complicated than that. Of course, there's many more groups of individuals, both from a transient perspective and also a permanent perspective.
Yeah.
People who have difficulty moving up and down stairs for all sorts of different reasons. So that's at fire safety strategy level. That's a way that fire safety design really stares down stares down the face of inclusivity. And there are approaches, for example, evacuation lifts or evacuation elevators, depending on which side of the pond you are, which are a practical measure which enables people that can't or might have difficulty in moving down the stairs. At another layer of the system, there's something a bit more fundamental, which is what people call equitable fire safety. So it's an idea that people who are finding their place of home, work or play in buildings, like most of us, they're afforded a different level of fire safety compared to other people. Okay. For example, socioeconomic grouping might cause, and is the data illustrates quite, there's clear connectivity between socioeconomic group and the level of fire safety, which of course is that should worry us. That should really that shouldn't sit well with anyone. And then you bleed into other less well represented groups that may be afforded a lower level of fire safety, which again, it simply shouldn't sit well with us as practicing engineers, as professionals and as leaders.
So where do you could you drill down a bit more then into who those groups might be that are afforded that lower level of protection?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. There's one particular group that it's positive because there is more of a discussion around these individual people that live in informal housing. And when people talk about informal housing, informal settlements, perhaps some people and some listeners today might be thinking about shanty towns on the edge of large cities around the world, formed of corrugated metal and bits of plastic or something like that. And of course, those are informal settlements, but there are other types of informal living that exist all over the world. For example, folk living and sleeping in tents, people that have moved into buildings which have been abandoned. All sorts of different people. So that's one extreme edge of that scale. But of course, there's a whole spectrum with respect to that equitable fire safety, and you can easily imagine that housing, the level of both physical fire safety measures, but also management, the quality of management, the quality of operation of those physical fire safety elements and measures, you'll see a delta there. With respect to to take your example there, a super fancy condo. I'm making the assumption that you live in a super fancy condo, down to something that isn't quite that.
In the design process then, or working with design teams on new builds or on retrofits on brownfield facilities or existing buildings and renovation and what have you, what's coming to my mind now is the Royal Institution of British Architects RIBA's 10-stage design cycle process. How strong and prominent and embedded is your area of practice into that cycle? Because what I've found when work that I've done on inclusive design before is that these considerations become a bit of an afterthought or a bit too late in the chain, and then some of your degrees of freedom are sort of pinned down and you've got less flexibility to do what you would have done had it been fully considered early on. So do you feel like the behavior in your peers and across the sector is now it is fundamental and it's always considered, or sometimes it design still pass through and you pick things up that shouldn't be there at that stage in the design because there's been a misunderstanding or a lack of involvement earlier on in the design process?
Yeah, I would say that I've witnessed there has been a change following the fire at Grenfell. That change isn't probably consistent across every single individual actor within the vast, extremely complicated industry of industries, which is the built environment. The fact that we don't really know, I'm using the phrase built environment. Some people call it design and construction. Some people call it property. Some people, we almost can't even altogether agree on a name of what to call it. But what people do really recognize is that it's not one industry. It's lots of different industries all linked together in a very complicated way. And that complication is only getting one way as well. Supply chains are becoming more and more fragmented, and subconsulting to subconsulting to subconsulting, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's important to think about that as the context, because in such a complicated and complex interwoven overarching system, there's lots of inertia. So things that are happening in part of that system aren't necessarily going to be propagated through the entire system. So I think that variation is still there, definitely.
Okay.
And you might see that variation in awareness depending on the sector, perhaps, or the size of organization, or the type of work that organization is doing. So I think that's a long-winded answer, really, of saying on a good day, I think people are thinking about it, and on a bad day, they're still probably not thinking about it as much as as we might hope.
Is there anything that could be done cross sector or through collaboration between the Institution of Fire Engineers, the Institution of Mechanical Engineers, other professional engineering bodies? Is there anything that could be done to crystallize all this down into is there a really simple design methodology piece that, because where I find things often fall down in these complex and complicated systems, as you describe, is the fact that we all work in silos and actually we're not the best as an industry at communicating and cross communicating. Mm-hmm. So is there any combination of doing that well that I've just described that you think might actually then make more actors in the space have it front of mind more frequently? Is there sort of like a cross engineering comms campaign or awareness raising initiative that we should consider to try and make it more front of mind for more people?
There's definitely a lot of really good work happening cross discipline, cross professional engineering institution and other professional institutions as well. Lots of people dedicating a lot of time and effort and brain power into try and solve these problems across the gamut of good practice, standard approaches to what does good look like from a competency perspective, the creation of new competency frameworks, and that is good. I think that professional engineering institutions and other institutions that didn't previously talk to each other are talking to each other more, which is fantastic. My observations are that, and definitely have been, that when, and this is talking UK centric, there are events, conferences, workshops organised by either industry organisations or the building safety regulator, for example, the new regulator. Absolutely fantastic. Lots of really great collaboration and networking and the initialization of partnerships. My observation is that, of course, you start to see the same people.
Yeah.
The same people that are interested, the same people that care, the same people that are passionate and believe in it. And then the risk in that, of course, is that it becomes not quite an echo chamber, but it just becomes a room of a couple hundred people really violently agreeing with each other.
Yeah.
So I think that there's something around the then all of that good work rippling further out.
Yeah.
And I think that communication could take lots of different forms. It definitely could be programs of formal communication, and the building safety regulator are doing lots of work there. But it can simply be as well the people in that room going out and talking to colleagues, talking to their network, encouraging them into that room. I do definitely think that the fact is now, as part of the Building Safety Act, we have a new regulator called the Building Safety Regulator, which sits within the Health and Safety Executive. And if there's carrots and sticks, that's the stick. Is the regulator. And I think that will start to move the needle also.
On behaviour. And I might be imagining this, but I think I remember seeing something on the Engineering Council website that the Engineering Council has taken responsibility or convening responsibility for a set of like a competency framework.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. So relatively soon after the fire at Grenfell Tower, it became apparent that competency was a key issue. And everybody is relatively familiar about thinking competency, skills, knowledge, experience, and then behavior was very quickly folded into that. And then a working group, it initially started as it was called the Competency Steering Group, later the Industry Competency Steering Group, was formed, spearheaded really by the CIC and the CLC, lots of three-letter acronyms. And there were a number of working groups. For example, Working Group 1, engineers, were the engineers, and then there were designers, there were building safety managers, there were contractors, there was a whole installers, whole bunch of people, and they went away to collaboratively co-create what good looks like with respect to competency. And you're absolutely right, that Working Group 1, which I sat on, Working Group 1 engineers, were part of the convening group was the Engineering Council UK. So as of right now, listeners might be familiar with the UK spec. So it's a set of competencies that chartered engineers are measured against to be able to be registered as a chartered engineer. We now have a UK spec HRB, high risk building, which is you could think of it as a sort of a specialization, bolt-on, level up. People initially were calling it CEng Star or CEng Plus, but it's this idea, it's a recognition that people that are working on residential buildings, tall residential buildings, which are very, very complicated beasts, may well need a higher level of competency compared to people not working on those types of buildings. It's early days. It is early days. There's a small number of professional engineering institutions which can register chartered engineers. So still a bit of a work in progress.
Amazing. Well, yeah. So I should say it's sort of January 2025 to give a bit of a timestamp on this recording for anyone listening to it in the future, when some of these things have started to take root and hopefully have the intended impact that they're designed to have. Looking at your profile, you have quite a bit of work in academia as well. You've sort of had a research theme to your sort of expertise and to what you do. So just wanted to find out a bit more about your work there.
Yep, I carried out my PhD at the University of Edinburgh, and my topic was related primarily to CFD-based fire modelling, development of, and experimentation that was carried out to validate the new capabilities of the CFD-based fire modelling. As part of the time I was at Edinburgh, there was a really brilliant opportunity to go over to Washington, DC, and spend some time as a guest researcher at the National Institution of Standards and Technology.
Oh yeah. Yes.
Who are the developers of a piece of software called Fire Dynamic Simulator, FDS, which is the most used CFD-based fire model within the fire engineering discipline.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah, fantastic piece, fantastic tool, open source, collaborative, continuously integrated. It was absolutely fantastic opportunity to spend over there.
And you've done some work at Brunel University as well, I think. There was some.
Yep, I was a visiting professor at Brunel for their undergraduate building services engineering course. Yeah, and the intent behind that was to try and encourage the students to think about fire safety engineering as part of their one of their final major projects, which was a building services design of a building.
So what role do you think academia plays in helping advance building safety? You know, the sort of theory and the practice. Do you see students coming out with enough of an understanding to then, when they're doing what you did those years ago, graduate engineer, and they're seeing graduate engineer come up, do you feel like the system's now priming the next generation with the right skills that they need for where the sector's at now?
Yeah, sure thing. There's definitely, of course, there's a two-way feedback loop between what you could call academia and industry.
Yeah.
Academia is creating new knowledge, creating new skilled individuals that feed into industry, and then industry are, and I use the terms in their most broadest way, industry are coming up with the problems effectively. These are the pain points.
Yeah.
One thing worth talking about specifically is apprenticeships.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm an external examiner at Birmingham City University, BCU, which is running a fire safety engineering apprenticeship program, Bachelor's of Engineering program.
Wow.
And I think apprenticeships are a good way of putting those two groupings, those two interacting elements of academia and industry closer together.
Yeah.
Whereby the students are out and about working on real problems, real industry problems on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis, and then going back, learning in a formal academic setting. And of course, that can only be a good thing, that connectivity, I think.
Yeah, definitely. It's fun. Yeah, BCU and the work we've been doing at IFE, the Institute of Fire Engineers, like the Birmingham City University, are also one of the Eco Engineers University partners. So
yeah, brilliant.
Probably need to have another conversation with you about triangulating some impact or something. Sounds like there's quite a lot of
excellent.
overlap of opportunity that's maybe there to coordinate.
And as well, for me, another fantastic thing about apprenticeships is that it unlocks that level of education for a whole bunch of people that could have just been not a practical choice at all. So that's absolutely fantastic.
It really helps with social mobility into the sector.
Oh yeah,
doesn't it? And
yep.
It's a really great. I mean, even if I look back on, I'd sometimes wonder now if I were to start again, would I do what I did? And with the cost of education now, tertiary education, to earn whilst you learn, as they say with an apprenticeship. So long as I could get that feeling of meeting peers and being on almost like, but some apprenticeship programs are so large, aren't they? That, well, actually, no. I mean, if universities are running, you almost get the best of both. Then, actually, don't you? You get that university type feel, but you're doing an apprenticeship. Meeting other people, like having peers, basically, on your program.
Yeah, I am aware that some people, like everything, on a good day, something can be good, and on a bad day, it can be less good. I'm aware that some people, one critique of apprenticeships is that on a bad day, it could undermine the pure academicness of the academic side of things. Students have this opportunity to this one shot at unfettered academic thought and freedom before they're thrown into the real world, and all the nasty things that adults know everything about tears into your academic utopia.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a halfway benefit. One of the universities we worked at had an integrated year in industry, and it was mandatory in order to graduate. It wasn't a sort of you go and do it. I mean, I deliberately didn't do it at Imperial because if you wanted to do a year in industry, you had to organise it off your own accord and then come back and then join the year that was below you. I was like, no way I'm doing that. I want to get through this course and then I'll do internships, in the summers, but no way did I want to see all my friends sort of finish a year before me,
wearing their gowns 12 months before you.
That was definitely the way I felt back then. But I've met a couple of engineers that did have that foresight, took that pause, went and did that, and then it just paid dividends for them in the early stages of their graduate career because they'd already worked for a year. They were familiar with workplace politics and because it's a bit of an art sometimes, isn't it, to navigate in the corporate world.
I would say that the some of the younger engineers and graduate engineers that I meet at, for example, institution and mechanical engineers events, blow me away with their level of experience and insight into the industry as 21-year-olds. Which gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or maybe I was just hanging out with all the wrong people when I was 21. I don't know.
Well, it's up to us now to help bring these people into the sector and make sure they feel included and they're supported as they come in, and we can impart that knowledge and wisdom, but also be open to challenge because it's a two-way street as well. Like maybe the next generation are learning things in a way that I was on a webinar yesterday. It's a safety engineering working group, and we were talking about developing. It was my first time in the meeting, and they were talking about developing webinars for this and webinars for that. And someone mentioned that maybe it's not the best forum for imparting information to the next generation of engineers that are coming in, who are all sort of TikTok centered and just-in-time information, needing access. And I'm like, that's not a small issue, that's quite a big issue, because you're about to put in all this effort to create knowledge, generate knowledge, capture knowledge, and then produce it into something that isn't going to be looked at, So I really do think I guess that was one of my thoughts I was having when I asked you the question about communications. I think one of the things we need to do better as a sector is meeting the future talent where it's at and coming and finding them and communicating to them in the way that they're used to consuming content. I think that's one of the things we're sort of missing a trick on, and probably is negatively affecting the potential that talent attraction could have to the sector. We're just not selling it in the right way or through the right forums. I know one of the engineers who won our Engineering Graduate of the Year category at the Engineering Talent Awards, Mohammed Tahir, he now runs his own company called The Airport Guy, and his videos showing behind the scenes at Heathrow Airport have had millions of views.
Yeah,
on
including
TikTok.
me. I've seen them. Yeah.
Have you seen them? Yeah, and
Yeah.
so he now does consultancy work for brands that want to attract Gen Z, and you see these highly overstyled corporate videos that the people commissioning them like, with all the fancy cutaways and soft music playing, and but they don't get watched. They only get watched by those. What actually people want is access through the phone to see what it's like on the job there and then. So I think he did some work with British Airways, and they're for their early career program. And the videos that they produced through him led to something like 50 to 70% of their graduate applications, their apprentice applications. And then they won an award at some recruitment industry award forum. So, I think that his style is an example of the sort of style that on a mass scale we should be looking at for some sort of talent attraction strategy. Now, it's today that the Supreme Court in the US have just said that they're going to ban TikTok, and so who knows whether or not TikTok will even still exist over here in the US after this episode recording, in the weeks to come. But
It's all a little red book now, isn't it? As I understand it, Red Note.
Red Note, yeah, this other
Red Note.
platform. I haven't looked into that. I'm just glad I didn't invest too much time in growing a TikTok following. Hopefully LinkedIn will stay fine. Okay. Quick fire questions. I just realised the word fire in that quick fire question.
Very good.
Yeah, that's funny. Okay. What's the most exciting project you've worked on and why?
I had the opportunity to work on a building called the Victorian Comprehensive Cancer Centre in Melbourne, Australia, which was a 1.5 billion Aussie dollar research, treatment, teaching facility. And probably the most exciting thing about it is that it had a particle collider in the basement.
Amazing. Who has been the biggest influence on your career? What did you learn from them?
At the risk of giving a bit of a trite answer, my dad, my father, who is and still is a practicing structural and civil engineer. So that's where I learned, that's where I found engineering. So he was the introduction to engineering, the engineering practice. And I still, to this day, learn things from him with respect to client care and engineering professionalism.
If you could improve one aspect of building safety overnight, what would it be?
I think I'd go to fire safety equality. Yeah, I think the inequality that we see with respect to fire safety afforded to different groups should worry a lot of people.
What's the one book or resource every fire safety professional should read?
Easy one, An Introduction to Fire Dynamics by Professor Dougal Drysdale, who worked at the University of Edinburgh. Perhaps I'm biased. And it's widely known as people call it the Bible, the Fire Science Bible.
What's the one book or resource I'll ask you that one. What advice would you give to someone just starting in fire safety engineering?
It would be get out and about, get out to workshops, conferences, CPD events, meet the folk that are there, network widely.
Great advice. How do you stay motivated and inspired in such a challenging and technical field?
With difficulty. Only joking. No. For me, I think you have to. I was listening to a podcast the other day about burnout
Yeah.
and the risk factors for burnout. And of course, there's volume and there's difficulty and there's. But the conclusion of the guest on the on the podcast was that if you haven't got support from colleagues and friends, that's the one key risk factor. So yeah, with respect to me staying motivated and inspired, it has to be the people around me, colleagues, friends and family.
Yeah. Burnout, that's another fire analogy there. Just making these connections now. It's quite ingrained in our language, isn't it? What's the most misunderstood aspect of fire safety in the built environment?
Probably a bit of a silly one is what you could think of as the Hollywood fallacy of sprinklers. When one sprinkler goes off, every single sprinkler head operates within a building, which isn't the case.
I'm glad you clarified that because I thought that was the case. So build what that I'm in. If you could work on any landmark building, past or present, what would it be and why?
There is a property in the City of London, 41 Cloth Fair, which is the only, to the best of my knowledge, it's the only building which survived the Great Fire of London in 1666.
Oh, right.
So I'd love to work on that building. And of course, heritage buildings from a fire safety perspective are extremely challenging, but from an engineering perspective, lots to get your teeth into.
What's the one skill you believe is essential for the next generation of fire engineers?
So I think 2 years ago, I'd probably say coding, but within a context of where we are, generative AI, and the help with respect to coding that generative AI can give. I probably wouldn't say coding, and I'd say either data science, a broad awareness and understanding of data science, or complexity science, probably.
And what's your proudest professional achievement to date?
Hard to pick one, really. I feel proud about what we're doing at Hollis at the minute, with respect to providing integrated practical fire safety solutions that sit aligned with or weave together other broader project objectives, like decarbonisation, like repositioning of assets, like upgrade, like retrofit.
Amazing. Tea or coffee?
Tea.
And are you an early morning person or an evening person?
Evening, for sure. No hesitation there.
Evening for sure. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Ben. It's been really good. Really enjoyed chatting to you. I've got loads more that I could have asked, but I think it's a really interesting area of engineering. In fact, we haven't even spoken about the fires that have been happening in Los Angeles at the time of this recording. It just goes to demonstrate that the risk is there with fire, but if managed rightly, with the right systems, with the right professionals behind every design and every project, we can live in a safe world. And the world is ever changing around us, so a career in fire engineering, there'll always be a career in fire engineering, actually, isn't it? It's one of those careers that you say we'll always need fire engineers.
I believe so. Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks for having me, Mark. Really enjoyed it.
So if people want to get in touch with you, how do they find out more about your work?
Yeah, sure thing. Go ahead and look me up on LinkedIn. Send me a request. Send me a message.
Perfect. Well, we'll put the link to your profile in the show notes in the transcript.
Brilliant.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ben. Catch up soon.
Cheers, Marks. Take it easy.
Bye. You have been listening to the Safe Leader podcast, uncovering the diversity story behind leading figures championing change to make our world a better place. If you have enjoyed the episode, please subscribe to the Safe Leader podcast on your podcast platform of choice and get notified when a new episode goes live. Did you know that we also offer a full transcript on each of our podcast episodes? Check out my website, markmcbridewright.com. Here, you can also explore the training, coaching, and keynote speaking services I offer. And whilst you're there, why not join the Safe Leader community by subscribing to the Safe Leader Insights mailing list? Thank you for listening, and please come back and join us on a future episode.